I am still in Geneva, as you can tell from my location. This is my hotel room, expensive as it is for not very much. But I have participated in the official launch event of Universal Genève. Speeches, canapes, and a close look at the watches. So I've got some thoughts. Let's dive in. Universal Genève were founded in 1894, and they were a brand that were known for innovation. Not quite on the Breguet kind of level, but kind of. In the 1930s, the 1940s, they were producing some of the most highly sophisticated chronographs out there. It was the compacts, the bicompacts, the tricompacts, and even the aero compacts, which I didn't know of myself, but apparently that's also a thing. In the 1950s, they took on Gerald Genter as a young designer, and he came up with one of the most iconic Universal Genève watches of them all, the Pole Rotor. This was a winner from a design perspective, and inside it had a micro rotor, and at the time, they were talked about not exactly on the level of Patek Philippe, but at least sort of in the vicinity-ish of those kind of brands. But then the quartz crisis hit, and Universal Genève didn't die, but they did just fade into obscurity. This basically continued throughout the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. The brand was held by a conglomerate in Hong Kong. They did little to nothing with the brand. And yes, they sold some watches in the Asian markets, but it was kind of like movie studios that hold on to intellectual property rights by, releasing a terrible movie every now and again. So, like the Fantastic Four, or Spider-Man or Thor, some of those 80s movies that just kind of came out to keep the sort of IP alive. If you'd like to support the channel, then click the subscribe button below. A lot of people watching these videos are return viewers, but have for some reason not clicked subscribe. So support the channel, click subscribe. Thanks a ton. In 2023, Breitling acquired the brand, and the intent on their side was clear. They would re-establish Universal Genève as a high-end brand, higher than Breitling, and it would contribute to turning Breitling into a group that had multiple tiers of brands. At the time, Breitling and George Kern were clear. Prices would be high. The starting point mentioned at the time was $10K, so $10,000 or more for an entry-level steel three-hander. So after a few teasers over the last year or two, so a box set collection of chronographs, some almost piece-unique kind of pole routers, the retail or pret-a-porter watches have now been launched. And it's a couple of collections, some targeted at men, some targeted at women. So you've got the pole router, the compact line, the disco, and the cabriolet line. On top of that, also some haute couture lines, which I'll get into in a moment. I can't really get into every single watch in minute detail, but if I had to boil it down to a single statement, I would say they're pretty awesome. These watches are absolutely gorgeous, and I think they've done a brilliant job of making new watches that connect with the history of Universal Genève without just being retro retreads. The pole router was beautiful back then, and it is now as well. The chronographs are my favorites, and even the Disco Mini, which is aimed at women, is a stunning watch. On paper, they are spec'd really, really well, and it doesn't look like they've cut any corners. The highlights for me, the brick bracelet is fabulous. I love it. The pole router dials are absolutely stunning. I think even the sort of stone dial ones, which I have a hard time with, those two are good. But the base steel model with a black dial is my favorite. Maybe the blue with the brick bracelet. I'm a boring person, but that's about as exciting as I get. The micro rotors are really cool. They just are. The disco isn't exactly, as I said, marketed at me, but I quite like it, and it's a million times more appealing than a Gerald Genter or Scene. I also love the detail that the Chrono Panda version is a bund strap only watch with that little Nina Rindt callback. The gold with the blue dial is probably my favorite though. These are stunning watches basically, and just end of story. Now, I did a video making my guesses about how they would go about it, and I think it's relevant to just run through what I guessed last time. I said that they might go for some version of Breitling movements in their entry models, and if they did, that it would be a mistake. I was sort of wrong, but not quite. My idea was that it would be unrealistic if they set up a complete in-house manufacturer to design movements from the ground up under the Genève umbrella. and they didn't do that. What they have done, though, is make Universal Geneve unique movements, but they have contracted external vendors to make them. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, mind you, but the UG100, to my knowledge, is developed and built by a company called Le Temple Manufacture or Manufacture du Temple. It's decorated by a company called Decotech, and the chronograph is built by Breitling. So they've sourced to get original movements, but they are original movements, but not fully manufactured. I also said that they would start with a slow dribble of limited releases, and they did do that. First with the piece unique pole routers, and then with this collector's set or box set of chronos, and now they have the big launch. I also said that they would not be able to have a full set of collections ready on launch, and I was completely wrong on that. They got several full collections done in 3 years, plus couture and piece unique models. And that's really impressive. I did not think that would be possible. I have to admit that it was beyond my comprehension that you can get so much done in 3 years. In my defense, of course I have to have some defense, development cycles have definitely speeded up over the last 3 years, but it's really impressive, and I did not see this coming. I also said the chronograph should cost around $14,000 or in the price range of a Daytona, and given inflation, that's about where it's landed. I said that they would put out some models that would be in contention for a GPHG award, and they have. The Couture and Métier des Arts collections are clearly positioned as plays for a GPHG prize. I also said they would be limited in availability, and I think that likely will be true, but I'll get back to that part. Overall, I think I've done okay in my predictions, more right than wrong at least, which brings me to the first big question. How the hell do you start a new brand and convince people to buy it? So I know Universal Geneve is a known brand among nerds like us, but who the hell outside of Nerd World and Anoraks knows of it? Nobody. Nobody on TikTok knows who Universal Geneve is. And this is important because you can't generate revenue entirely based on nerds. You need regular, normal people with lives and normal, healthy interests that don't involve spending lots of money on this kind of thing, but still not being a large number of people to sustain your business. I'll also temper this with the fact that some people are morons, and I am one of them, because we are easily manipulated. Swiss-made sells simply because there's implicit trust in the brand. Could there be customers out there that see Geneve, assume Switzerland, and then think, ooh, that must be a good Swiss brand? Absolutely. But it doesn't take away from the fact that despite our little love affair with Universal Geneve, this is a brand that is more or less starting from scratch. So what do? They launch a luxury brand with a starting point of $14,000, $15,000, $16,000, $17,000. That's a lot. And how much a lot is it? Well, the pole router costs more than any three-hander in steel from Jaeger-LeCoultre. They cost about the same as a Vacheron Constantin 56. The chronos only cost a little bit more, which is weird, but it puts it above a Daytona and kind of in JLC Polaris territory. Pretty much everybody went bananas over the price. $14K for a three-hander is a lot of money. More than I'd be willing to pay, and we can get into the whole discussion of how much do you pay for the watch and how much do you pay for the brand, but I'm not going to. All I'm going to say is this. Do the watches on first look come across as better finished and more premium than some IWC or Omega at, let's just say, half the price? Absolutely. Have they cut any corners? It doesn't look like it to me. Is this a price where Melvin Udall had a hand in it? Yes, because he thinks of a reasonably priced watch and then he takes away reason and accountability. At this price point, diminishing returns have absolutely kicked in. You are paying a lot for brand positioning here. You just are. That's the reality. But you have to admit, it's expensive when you're looking at a $10,000 or $11,000 Omega Constellation dress watch in steel and think, well, that's kind of reasonably priced actually. Now, was this a good idea, this positioning? Set aside for a moment your personal reaction to a 14,000 Swiss franc three-hander, because your knee-jerk reaction isn't relevant unless you regularly buy 14,000 Swiss franc JLCs, GPs, and Blancpains. If you're in the Sand Mountain, Tudor, or Omega space, these watches have never been targeted at you. So I think of it this way. As a new brand, you can offer value. So that's what Christopher Ward, Main, Monta, Formax offer. It's bang for your buck watches. That's your selling point. Or at the other extreme, you can be Richard Mille. You slap on a ridiculous price and you basically tell everybody that if you have to ask about the price, then the watch isn't for you. Your success as Richard Mille is entirely built on people who have FU money wanting your watch. It's about having the most expensive, most bananas crazy brand on your wrist, and that's the entire sales ballgame. And that applies to Richard Mille, to some extent Grubel Forsey, Grönefeld. The mechanism is broadly the same. This is for people that never ever think about the price, which kind of begs the question, what's the play at this price point? What Universal Geneve have is one thing. They've got a clean slate. There is, outside of the watch nerd world, nothing that defines Universal Geneve in the mind of the consumer. And I think that's an advantage. All they need to do is convince people that these watches are beautiful. And they had the opportunity to design the watches entirely according to contemporary tastes. There's very little memory or brand fatigue associated with them. There's no situation where the consumer, like with Blancpain, says, "Oh, their designs look dated," because everything is new. And I think the play for Universal Geneve is fairly simple. They're not aiming for the nerdy MB&F buyer, and they're not aiming for the old fart Patek buyer. You make watches that the regular and importantly contemporary consumer will look at and think, wow, these are nice watches. And also where some high-end buyers will think, sure, I can afford a fan service pole router in my collection. Universal Geneve is a new Spider-Man movie that has enough fan service to keep long-time fans happy, but is modernized enough to make it appealing to today's audience. Universal Geneve doesn't have to be Patek Philippe, and can't be. And when you've got a blank slate where they don't have to be beholden to historical design conventions and legacy baggage, I actually think it's possible, despite what most people see as completely absurd pricing. And honestly, I think they're off to a good start. Everybody complains about the price, but unlike the Code 1159, the Cubitus, and pretty much all of Bremont's initial releases, the actual watches have been received relatively positively. They've made some gorgeous watches. Are they retro enough for the anoraks? No, but they've made something good for most people. They just have. I'm not saying it's going to succeed, but I think that blank slate, specifically in this otherwise super challenging space, is an advantage. I do have some open questions that remain unanswered. The majority of the SKUs released are precious metal, and how much is going to be steel going forward is a big question. My guess is not much. I do kind of have this expectation for them to do a Rolex and say, yes, you have your steel compacts and it's readily available. But if I were them, I would not be pumping a ton of them out on the CNC machine. I can see them going the Patek route of prioritizing precious metal and keeping steel relatively limited. A lot of people are already now foreseeing big discounts on those watches in a year or so, and I don't think it's a given, because it's going to depend on how many watches they put on the shelves and how actively they aim to manage supply against demand. My gut tells me that they will and should be restrained, so they can develop that feeling of perceived scarcity. They're not aiming to be a low volume brand like MB&F, but I do think they're going to do their best to control supply. In the beginning, they don't have the scale anyway, so there will be fewer watches in circulation than people would like. So I wouldn't immediately expect those watches to fall through the floor pricing-wise in a year. I just don't think they'll flood the market at retail, so less is just going to flow to the flipper scene. I'm also curious as to how they'll lean into marketing going forward. So far, I haven't noticed any Universal Geneve models popping up on the wrists of celebrities. For now, that part of their marketing angle has been fairly absent. And I do think that if you want some level of desirability, they need to do something on that, in that regard. Another thought I've got, and this kind of connects to the contemporary positioning that they've done. I said in my first video that movements would be the key, and this is probably the place where Kern and company have gone in a completely different direction than I had expected. I said movement was key for two reasons. First of all, because expensive watches aren't compelling if they have crappy movements. Second of all, because movements and complications are part of what people associate with Universal Geneve. Universal Geneve and Kern did the first bit. They made sure that the movement matches the price. But there's almost nothing in their marketing that leans into manufacture, in-house, or technical prowess. There's nothing of that kind of JLC watchmaker nonsense. They literally are not playing the movement game. This is in a lot of ways a fashion watch brand. They're making a watch that is just supposed to be good looking, and they're not using a lot of those classic watch manufacturer arguments. They are closer aligned to Louis Vuitton in the sense than they are to Jaeger-LeCoultre. And I think that's a smart play. I would even go so far as to say that they're not really, in the long term, that worried about the traditional watch scene and the heritage Geneve fan. So sure, if some fans buy their watches here in the beginning, they would love that. And whatever conversation that is generated is a positive for them. But they are going to be a fashion brand. They even call the lines prêt-à-porter and couture. So it's in a positive sense. They want regular people to recognize these watches as nice contemporary watches, and they want these regular people to buy them. They're not aiming for the nerdy MB&F buyer, and they're not aiming for the old fart Patek buyer. Also, is there room for popular designs like integrated bracelet versions of their watches? The question I'm asking is, how far are they willing to stray from the core Universal Geneve back catalogue to accommodate contemporary watch tastes? So, those were my thoughts. Share your thoughts in the comments. Like, subscribe. Cheers.